I would like to inform you that we have interpretation facilities for both English and Bahasa Indonesia. You can access the interpretation channel via a button located towards the bottom right of your Zoom screen. Just to point out that you'll need to select the tab that says Japanese if you're seeking interpretation in Bahasa Indonesia, because Zoom does not have an option for the language integrated into its platform. This webinar is being recorded. It is also being live streamed over the YouTube channel of the Center for Health Policy and Management of Gajah Mada University. A copy of the recording and presentations will be made available on the Ministry of Health's dedicated industry website. My colleagues will share that address in the chat box now. And very quickly, this webinar series is part of the COVID-19 Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project, a US government-funded public-private partnership between USAID, the American National Standards Institute, and the Advanced Medical Technology Association. This webinar is very kindly supported by the Ministry of Health Indonesia and Gajah Mada University. As usual, some housekeeping. Please ensure that you are muted unless you're presenting. If you have questions or comments, please drop them in the chat box and the moderators and panelists will try to address them when they get the opportunity. To kick us off, I'd like to invite Professor Laksono Trisnantoro, the Special Advisor to Indonesia's Minister of Health for Resilience of Pharmaceutical and Medical Device Industries, to deliver introductory remarks. Prof.
Thank you, Mugant. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So I try to speak in Bahasa Indonesia. Selamat pagi, selamat siang, dan mungkin yang sampai sore ya, sudah sore ya. Oke, pada hari ini kita masuk ke webinar kedua. Mohon slide-nya ditayangkan, dan ini sebuah program knowledge sharing yang menarik, jadi tentang good regulatory practices and medical device regulations. Jadi kalau kita lihat tadi yang sudah Pak Mugant ya, ini memang sangat timely ya, sangat tepat waktunya, karena Indonesia sekarang sedang berusaha ya untuk mengejar ketinggalan dalam konteks produksi medical device. Ya. Dan regulasi menjadi satu isu yang sangat kunci dalam kegiatan ini. Slide berikutnya, ya. Jadi kalau kita lihat apa yang ada, memang penyelenggaranya itu adalah USAID, tapi ini bekerjasama dengan swasta ya, yaitu di Advanced Medical Technology Associations, dan juga ada institut untuk standarisasi ya, di American National Standards Institute. Ya. Nah ini menarik ya, karena industri ini berarti sebuah industri yang tidak mudah ya, karena membutuhkan standar yang tinggi, dan juga kalau kita lihat ada perkembangan teknologi yang semakin lama semakin advance, semakin jauh, semakin tinggi, dan tentunya risiko juga akan semakin tinggi juga ya. Risiko untuk tubuh manusia ataupun risiko untuk kesehatan masyarakat. Ya, slide berikutnya. Nah ini kalau kita lihat, memang ketika bicara mengenai good regulatory practices, ini intinya ada sebuah mekanisme kontrol untuk mutu ya. Dan ini yang sangat penting untuk kita di negara sedang berkembang. Ini memang antara kualitas dan juga masalah pemerataan ataupun peluang untuk produksi itu bisa menjadi dilema ya. Artinya kalau kontrolnya itu sangat tinggi, benchmarknya atau sangat tinggi batasnya, itu kita akan sampai pada satu titik yang mungkin akan sulit untuk mengembangkan industri kesehatan ya. Kesehatan. Tapi kalau terlalu rendah itu juga akan dipertanyakan mengenai quality ya, dan juga bagaimana cost effectiveness dari peralatan medik yang dihasilkan ya. Jadi ini satu hal yang sangat penting. Juga good regulatory practices ini akan membahas juga bagaimana sistem pengawasan regulasi yang efisien ya. Oke. Nah kalau ini terjadi, yang baik tadi itu memang sangat tepat ya, karena medical device sector atau sektor alat kedokteran ini sebuah sektor yang sangat highly regulated ya, seperti penerbangan itu highly regulated karena mempunyai risiko untuk memberikan impact yang tidak pas untuk tubuh manusia ya, dan juga sangat kompleks prosesnya, sangat panjang dari pre-market sampai post-market. Ya, slide berikutnya. Nah, ini kalau kita lihat dalam rangka untuk membuat semacam gambaran besar ya tentang good regulatory practices ini, webinar ini berjalan 2 kali ya, di mana yang minggu lalu kita membahas mengenai setting internasional dari good regulatory practices, di mana ada overview mengenai praktek dan standar untuk good regulatory ya, ini yang disampaikan oleh banyak pakar internasional, kemudian juga framework untuk regulasi medical devices. Nah, hari ini kita akan masuk pada Indonesian Good Regulatory Practices, di mana kita akan mencoba untuk membahas bagaimana situasi di Indonesia. Dan ini sangat menarik ya, karena kita akan melihat bagaimana kita akan mencoba untuk mengejar apa yang kita sebut sebagai ketertinggalan. Dan sebagai satu learning process, kalau kita cermati, ini kami di UGM menyediakan web khusus untuk industri obat dan alkes ya, yang bisa diakses di sini. Salah satu industrinya pakai I ya, bukan I. Nah, dan harapannya dari pertemuan 2 kali webinar ini, kita akan ada semacam pelatihan yang detail untuk staf kementerian kesehatan dan juga para stakeholders yang ada di sektor medical device. Nah, pelatihan-pelatihan ini yang perlu sekali untuk kita kerjakan tadi secara timely ya, karena saatnya sekarang timing sangat tepat ya untuk mengembangkan satu sistem regulatori yang cocok dan tepat untuk bangsa kita. Untuk itu saya mengucapkan terima kasih pada USAID, Pak Mugant dan teman-teman, juga para pembicara hari ini, ada dari birokrasi, ada juga dari industri yang kita sama-sama mencoba untuk mengembangkan medical device sektor ini secara lebih baik melalui perbaikan sistem regulatori. Sekian dan terima kasih. Selamat berdiskusi. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof. And once again, greatly appreciative of your support for the MDRC. Briefly, before we start, let me recap the topics and issues that we discussed last week at the webinar on global trends in good regulatory practice. During the first panel on good regulatory practices and standards, we heard about the World Trade Organization's Technical Barriers to Trade, or WTO-TBT agreement, and how it relates to GRP, so good regulatory practices, and the role of Indonesia's National Standardization Agency, or BASN, and Indonesia's WTO-TBT notification obligations. The second panel on global frameworks for regulation of medical devices discussed the World Health Organization's GRPs and good reliance practices and their principles, the WHO's efforts to strengthen health regulatory systems, the global model regulatory framework for medical devices, including in vitro devices. And we also had speakers presenting an overview of Indonesia's medical device regulations and its health system transformation plan, and Singapore's medical device regulatory policy and its pilot regulatory reliance model with Thailand. And if you missed last week's webinar, the video recording and presentations are available online. Today's webinar on good regulatory practices in Indonesia and stakeholder perspectives will discuss quality management systems, processes and standards for medical devices, and post-market surveillance issues. We have also got speakers representing the industry associations, Gakeslab and Spaki, offering industry perspectives on these topics. Without further ado, let's move on to our first panel on convergence in medical device quality management system, national regulatory authority, and industry perspectives. The panel will discuss best practices and international standards and guidance on management of safety and efficacy, such as the Medical Device Single Audit Program, as well as Indonesia's own principles for quality management and approval of medical devices and industry observations. Moderating the panel is MDRC's very own medical device sector lead, Sandra González. Sandra, over to you to introduce the session and the panelists.
Thank you very much, Mugant, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this great effort that has meant a lot of subject matter experts involved in the past session, and it is going to continue to be in this one. So I'd like to start by introducing the three participants in our panel, as Mugant mentioned, on utilization and of international standards as a means for convergence on good manufacturing practices. So for the first, we will have Frédéric Hamelin. Frédéric is the manager of the Quality Systems section in the Bureau of Planning and Operations of the Medical Devices Directorate and the chair of CSAZ 289. He participated in the development of ISO 13485-2016 and was an active member of the Global Harmonization Task Force Study Group 4 from 2006 until disbandment. He is currently a subject matter expert, assessor, and assessment program manager representing Canada in the MDSAP consortium. Frédéric has been with the Medical Devices Directorate in Health Canada since 2002. We also have Fikriansyah bin Irman. Fikri is a senior medical device reviewer in the Ministry of Health of the Republic of Indonesia. After finishing his Master of Public Health at the University of Melbourne under the Australia Awards Scholarship Program, he is now responsible for medical device local production initiative in Indonesia as part of the Center for Health System and Strategies. We also have Randy Tegu, who is currently the Secretary General of GAIXLAN Indonesia, which is the Indonesian Association of Medical and Laboratory Device Enterprise. He is also Vice Head of Pharmaceutical and Medical Device Permanent Committee, Indonesia Chamber of Commerce. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Frédéric Hamelin to start sharing his remarks in regards of convergence related to good manufacturing practices. So Frédéric, welcome. Thank you very much. We are very honored to have the three of you with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I hope my slides are showing up and the volume is good. I hope someone will let me know if there's a problem. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you some of our experience we've had with convergence in medical device QMS regulations, and how that occurs. What are the factors that have to be considered? What are some of the pitfalls and barriers to these things, and what are the success factors? And so if you would allow me, I'd like to have maybe start with just a quick little case study, which will help discuss a bit about, sort of illustrate a bit what I'm talking about. So the case study is going to be about ISO 13485 and MDSAP. And these are as an example of regulatory convergence. So if we look at what the situation was going back to pre-2015, so we had 5 countries that had fairly close trading relationship and regulatory relationships, and obviously a lot of overlap in terms of industry and production and importation and distribution of products. But we were using different approaches to conduct oversight of QMS. So this led to, unfortunately, duplication, which meant manufacturers being audited or inspected multiple times a year. Inefficiencies, obviously, because at that point, we've got 5 countries undertaking work that is essentially equivalent to each other. And of course, this all adds cost. It adds cost to the medical device manufacturers, which pass this on to the healthcare system and consumers. And it adds cost to also taxpayers who help support these government programs to conduct this oversight. And so the strategy that was taken to help meet those challenges and move towards to converge towards a common goal was to agree, first of all, on what we would use as criteria. Now, thankfully, we had an internationally recognized standard, ISO 13485, which we'd all participated in working on, and which was, some of us were already using explicitly, and some of us were using something very close or kind of parallel or with some small adjustments. So we were all, again, as I said, we were doing different things, but it was very, very similar. So we agreed to have a common core of requirements, which was ISO 1345. And for those of you who are well-versed in the industry, going back to 2015, the FDA saying, yeah, we're going to accept 1345 was a bit of a surprise to many people. But this was one of the important steps in this convergence, is that everyone agreed that we need to agree on this, and it means that we'll have to make some compromises at some point. Recognizing that different doesn't mean not necessarily as good or as equivalent, it just means not what we're normally doing right now. And so we agreed on this, as well as standardizing an approach to conduct this oversight, so all these audits are performed, as well as creating a framework for recognizing third parties that are auditing these manufacturers. The result of all this work was that we were able, as a consortium of 5 countries, to develop a common program to conduct oversight of the quality management system of manufacturers globally without duplicating our efforts, and doing this in a way that would respect each regulatory jurisdiction's approach, if you will, or system, because we all regulate things slightly differently, which will bring me to my next slide. First of all, just a quick thing. I really like this quote, which is, it's said that a wise person learns from his mistakes. A wiser person learns from others' mistakes, but the wisest person of all learns from other successes. So I hope you all can be the wisest of all regulators and learn from our successes we've had in this convergence endeavor. So when we talk about convergence, sometimes we need to understand that let's say you have 2 jurisdictions in A and B, there's going to be elements of commonality. Now, obviously, it's not going to be these very smooth, nice geometric shapes. But the key thing is to understand what are the commonalities that we can converge on. And commonalities are not specifically always down to the technical requirements, but sometimes it's in question of what is the policy objective of certain regulatory practices? What are we trying to achieve with these regulatory practices versus what exactly is this particular program or requirement? So the first thing is, this is where the magic happens. This is the important part, is the commonality. So what are the inputs to this convergence? Well, the first question always is going to be who. And who's being regulated is important, because one of the things we experienced very early on in our convergence experiment with MDSAP was that we didn't regulate all the same parties in the same way. So different jurisdictions will regulate, contract manufacturers or subcontractors or sterilizers. Other only regulate the final person putting the product on the market. And these are important considerations because they are going to impact where you can converge and how you can converge on things. The next question is how. Because again, we don't all regulate entities the same. Some of us do it on a facility basis. Some of it do it on a business or corporate basis. Also, some people regulate devices independently. Others might regulate them specifically to a license holder, and the exact same device sold by someone else needs a separate authorization. The next thing again is the what. So what regulatory actions take place? What needs to be done? What type of oversight or controls or evaluation or marketing authorizations? Again, this is all part of sort of setting the scope of this convergence. These are all steps we had to take. The other one that's important is the when. When does this occur? When do these things occur? For instance, in Canada, we have a requirement that prior to obtaining marketing authorization, one needs to obtain MDSAP certification to demonstrate quality control. In the US, for instance, under the 510K pathway to approval, you can obtain a 510K clearance and not have undergone an inspection yet. So that will come at a later date. So again, these are things that come into play because the timing in the market, or sorry, the timing when this oversight occurs is going to impact what evidence is available to review in terms of production records and whatnot. And again, these are all things that sort of speak about the commonality, but the scope, and you have to flush these things out to have a successful convergence activities. Now, what are some pitfalls and barriers? Well, let me tell you, we met a lot of them along the way. So unachievable goals is a big one, right? So we have to think about what are our resources and capacity to do this today, next year, and 5 years from now, recognizing that, well, as governments, we have fluctuating funding at some points. And so we have to be able to create something that can last consistently, and that we'll be able to resources on a permanent basis. The other thing is unreasonable expectations. Just because we have a great idea for convergence, we have to be reasonable about what can actually reasonably be achieved. And it's important to create reasonable expectations and goals. Otherwise, it's very easy to find yourself in a situation where you feel like you're failing because you've got your eyes on something that's not achievable yet. Incompatibilities was another thing we had to recognize, right? Because again, our coverage and what's covered and who's regulated and who's not regulated and all these scope things have to be figured out. This is something we did a bit later in our development, and it did create some problems for us, identifying, who's covered by this program, who's not, and also identifying incompatible requirements. Thankfully, we didn't really have any of those, but definitely there are some of these out globally where, some people will have very specific requirements that are incompatible with other regulators. And so you need to identify those. Another important thing is the cost of your regulatory endeavor cannot be greater to the manufacturer than the value of your market to them. And that's just a market reality that you can't expect a regulator to spend more money complying with regulatory requirements than they can expect to make. The reality is that these costs will be passed on to your healthcare system and your consumers. So that is something that has to be kept in mind, the benefit cost ratio and the market value. Again, avoiding duplication is a great way to reduce those costs. And it's important here, I put a note about industry characteristics. This is super important to understand. Very often when we go to these large forums and these conferences and we talk to these trade associations, many of the participants from industry are coming from very large corporations, global corporations, big companies that have the resources and the wherewithal to participate in these activities. And they contribute very effectively. Unfortunately, the reality is, if we look at globally, medical device manufacturers, especially in the very innovative areas, many of them are very small companies, small micro-sized companies, and some of these innovators, very small companies. They don't have the same resources and wherewithal as these larger companies. And we have to keep in mind that the challenges that they are going to face with any sort of regulatory program is going to be completely different than these large companies are going to face. And they may not be in a position to provide that feedback to you. So you may need to go out and seek input from them, actively engage them to get that information so that you can account for that. Loopholes. If there are multiple pathways to something, people will always pick the path of least resistance. So make sure that you always look that you're not creating loopholes for other to any sort of convergence activity. Infrastructure is very important. You have to make sure you have a sound legal framework for your work, but also you need to think about technical infrastructure. We had to put a lot of work into a technical infrastructure for MDSAP to be able to collaborate and share information safely and confidentially. And also confidence is key. You have to have confidence in your regulatory partners. You have to get confidence from industry and from consumers that what you're doing isn't not lowering those standards. As Professor Trisnantoro said, if we lower the standards too much to make things easier, then we're going to run into problems. And this is the fine line of building that confidence. So what are the success factors that bring this in? Number one, communication. I cannot stress enough, communication is key to stakeholder engagement and participation. You have to engage with your stakeholders. Sometimes you have to go get them. They will not come to you. Transparency is essential. You have to show everyone what you're doing, how you're doing it. For instance, in MDSAP, everything is publicly available on our website. We're not hiding anything. This transparency helps to build both credibility and confidence. Adaptability. You will have to correct course at some points and make adjustments. That's inevitable. And finally, you're going to have to be patient. So successful transformation is a long-term endeavor. And this is what we've learned with MDSAP. You need to be patient and introduce these things with time and runway for people to adapt and move into this space and be successful. We cannot do these things overnight with any measure of success. putting up here my contact information at any point. Feel free to capture this if anyone has any questions specifically about MDSAP or Canadian regulations or convergence or experience in that respect. Feel free to reach out to me, and it'll be my pleasure to answer your questions or carry on the discussion. So thank you, and I guess Sandra, I'll return the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Fred. And you were really a master on managing your time. So really, we are very appreciative also on that, but of course, more importantly, on the content of your message. So we will have the Q&A session at the end of the participation of the other two panelists. So I'd like to welcome now Fikri. I'm sorry for my awful pronunciation.
Just call me Fikri. It's okay, Sandra.
Okay, Fikri. Thank you very much. You made my life way easier. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for joining us today. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. So a very good morning to my friends here in Indonesia, and probably good evening, Frédéric. I think it's almost 11 p.m. there, and I believe Sandra as well, almost midnight there. Thank you very much for tonight's agenda on the training. I will share my screen. So as Sandra already shared, that now I'm working with the Minister of Health Office on our plan on the transformations, not only medical devices, but also health in general. So that's the first thing that I'm going to share with everyone's here on the training, because I'm also in the team with Professor Laksono himself on our goal to, can everyone see my screen? On our goal to make the next generation healthier, well-educated, and productive. So this is the 6 pillars that the Ministry of Health trying to achieve, at least before 2024. The first one is on the primary care. And then the second pillar is on the secondary preventions. So this is the network of our vertical hospitals. The one that's related to us on medical devices on the third pillar, which is the health resiliencies that include resiliency of pharmaceutical and medical devices sectors. I will go more into details in the next upcoming slide. The fourth, more into health financing transformations. The fifth on the health talent transformations, and the sixth on the biotechnology. So health technologies related pillars of transformations. These 6 pillars actually a bit similar, if you can see on the public health building blocks that WHO published several years ago. So on the focus on the third pillar, so we try to aim local productions of pharmaceutical and medical devices and emergency response resilience, but I'll be more focusing on the medical devices side because I have limited time today as well. So if you see on the row of the medical devices, what we're trying to achieve in Indonesia is to increase the purchases of 16 out of 19 top medical devices by volume and value produced in Indonesia. By this year, we try to implement the local content, or we call it TKDN, Tingkat Komponen Dalam Negeri, or the local content requirement of the medical devices. So we are working together with the Ministry of Industry to create the regulations on how we can improve or we can increase the usage or the utilizations of the raw material that's already established here in Indonesia. The second objective is to improve the productions of high-tech medical devices, at least 3 out of 19. So in the next slide, you will see this is the top 10 of the by volume and by value medical devices that we are trying to produce in Indonesia. So Frédéric, Sandra, if any of the manufacturers in Americas want to build their manufacturing sites in Indonesia, we are very welcome. There will be a good package of incentives that will be provided by the government if the company wants to build their manufacturing site in Indonesia. So you can see here the by value, there's highlighted there, the one that with low production capacity still in Indonesia, including the ventilators, cardiac monitor, mobile X-ray system, and the ultrasonic pulse Doppler imaging system. We got a good progress so far for the first semester of 2022. We have positive feedback from industries that they're trying to do joint ventures, technology transfers, and several others trying to collaborate with our local industries to make their production site in Indonesia. So we are very welcome for more manufacturers to build or to do their research and technology transfers to Indonesia. This is the actions items that we are trying to do in the upcoming years. We are trying to facilitate even starting from clinical trial for medical devices, chain stores, not only even pharmaceuticals, but also I believe in the upcoming months, we're trying to analyze how to use the plastics and medical grade stainless steel that are available in Indonesia to be used by our medical device industry. For the market protection itself, we try to do substitutions of imported products to local products of medical devices. And then the second components on the right side already mentions about the local content policy and also the implementations of increased use of domestic product. Now, all of this that we are trying to do is to increase the access, the availability of the medical devices itself. That's why regulatory convergence and harmonization is really playing a big role of these actions. So we see that in previous year, the World Health Assembly created this statement that strengthened the regulatory capacity is important to ensure affordable medical products that are safe, good quality, and effective. This line on the bottom row of the slide is the benefit that we can get from the convergence. I believe Frédéric already mentioned that as well, that it can go beyond not only reduce the time of regulations, but it can go to reduce mortality and morbidity. So what we are trying to do is actually to protect our people. This is also already in Professor Laksono's slides that in Indonesia government, the Ministry of Health, the one that is responsible for medical devices control, we have the end-to-end control here, not only the pre-market, but also the post-market control. So we already implemented the good manufacturing practice and good distribution practice before the product can go to the market. So it's really end-to-end from, they call it from bad to grave. So from early state of the research and development until the disposal of the medical device itself. And for the post-market control, we are doing not only vigilance, but also the surveillance of the medical device after they go into the market. This is the outlook or the landscapes of what
I think we are having a technical problem.
Yes, I'm really sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Where was I? All right. I believe still in this slide.
Yes, it is not in presentation mode though.
All right, let me stop
Now it
sharing.
is. Now, oh, it was done.
All right. Now?
Now it is.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
So I was saying about the ASEAN Medical Device Committee. Indonesia is, we were the chair for several years of that committee. So we were just finished our technical discussion as well on how we can harmonize the classifications, and also we have several lists of borderline products, which one is will be regulated as medical devices, which one will be not, and other, because the development of the technology as well. And then we have collaboration. We also have active participation with the CERN, Southeast Asia Regulatory Network, and the one that I'm actually focusing on at the moment is the Global Health the Global Harmonization Working Party, GHWP. I'm actually the chair for the Working Group 5 on clinical evidence and safety for medical devices. So I will take this opportunity to invite everyone as well. If you are very welcome from the industry side and the regulatory side to join the GHWP working group as a member, so you can get more involved in the discussion on the technical guidance. So as the country itself, we have bilateral cooperations, not only on regulations and convergence, but we also have more MOUs and joint action plans, how to build up on our medical device capabilities and harmonizations. Oops. Next slide. This is one of the example how convergence and harmonizations work. We used to have classifications almost similar with the EU. So we have class 1, 2, and 3. I believe the US FDA still use classification 1, 2, and 3. But then with the ASEAN Medical Device Directive, we converge it. We agreed to have a harmonized standard where we are using classification A, B, C, D based on the risk of the medical device itself. This is the overview of our medical device registrations. So now we have a one portal to all of the registrations, not only for health products, but also other products from they need to be registered in our system of the government of Indonesia. They call it the online single submission, or OSS. All of the applicants need to have their account there, and then each specific products will go through its specific ministry or directorate. In this case, the Direktorat for Medical Device Review or Evaluations. So we are doing the evaluations, and we have one chance of additional data. And after that, there will be two options of approve or disapprove. And we have a different kind of registration as well. So we have new registration, renewal, variations, and renewal with variation. We also have notifications. So it will be explained in the upcoming slides. But in this slide, I just want to emphasize that not only manufacturer can submit their registration, but also distributor for imported products. This is what the impact of the different classifications. So the highest risk will have to submit more evaluations data documents to ensure the safety, quality, and efficacy or performance of medical devices. So in the left side of the slide, you can see the examples of the products. This is also based on the AMDD regulations, how we divide them. So on the right side, you can see the timeline and registration fee. I believe I've been told that Indonesia, a timeline and registration fee is the fastest and the cheapest at the moment. So it is very good for manufacturers or distributors to register their products to Indonesia, especially if it is local products. This is the CSDT format. This has already been approved, agreed, or harmonized in ASEAN itself. This is the overview. And in the next slide, I believe, is the detail of the requirements. So from Frédéric's slide earlier, you can see this is the what needs to be submitted. I already mentioned the who, and in the first slide is the why. So this is, I believe some of our friends, colleagues here from the industry side in Indonesia are already familiar themselves with all of these requirements from Form A to Form E. For notifications, I believe several ASEAN countries already implement this as well. We created the list, which Class A, so certain Class A medical devices that can go into a faster access, so faster evaluation process because they have a lower risk compared to other Class A medical devices. So you can see here how differ between the notifications and the regular Class A. So it can you can get your notifications in 6 working days with less requirements needed. This is several guidance documents. I believe my time is only 1 minute left. You can find it in this website, regalcas.kemenkes.go.id. Click on this icon and then find the guidance documents there. This is the aim that we want to do, that together we can build a stronger and healthier Indonesia. Actually, I just finished the G20 presidency's meeting for health ministerial, the first health ministerial meeting here in Yogyakarta. So that is also the similar slogan, jargon that we are trying to do, that is recover together, recover stronger. At least that's all for me today. I'll give it back to Sandra. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fikri. Now we're very appreciative. I think it was really in a very, very short time. It was a very comprehensive sharing of information, of a lot of information. And of course, we're going to be getting into a very in-depth review of all the slides and all the information that you shared, because that is kind of like the way to really get into a further understanding and adoption of and possibility of application of all the valuable information that you have already shared. And now getting into
Sandra, sorry, and Prof. Laksono and everyone, just in case someone need me here in the meeting, I might need to excuse myself, but I try my best to stay until the Q&A. But if not, I will put in the chat if I have to go, and I'm happy to put my email as well if everyone have any questions. But I'll try my best to stay.
No, thank you
I
very
just
much.
have to apologize in advance. Thank you.
No, please don't be. And in case we have any question for you, if it's okay, we will be forwarding that to you via email, so we may respond it to whomever might be asking those. So thank you very much. Hopefully you can stay, but thank you for advising that it might not be the case. So now getting into the other, kind of like the other side of the equation, where we have the industry, manufacturers, distributors, and how they perceive the benefits that can be brought by working towards convergent regulations and convergent mechanisms as to allow for a more efficient way to make medical devices available to patients. It really sounds very exciting, all the initiatives that Indonesia is putting in place as to attract investment, as to improve access to medical devices and high-tech devices to population and to the patients in Indonesia. So I would like to welcome now Randy Teguh to share his perspective on regulatory convergence related to manufacturing of devices.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Good morning and good evening. So better I say good day to all of you, because I believe some of you is in a different time zone. I will try to present or give my association perspective on regulatory convergence topic today. Because I noticed the participants, some of them is mostly from Indonesia, so please let me allow to use two language in bahasa in English. So the topic that I received.
I stopped listening to Randy. I don't know if it is only me.
Yes, I think there's some trouble with Randy's audio.
Randy, if you can listen to us, we cannot listen to you. So our apologies if you just give us a couple of minutes so we may find a solution to run this connection issue. We'd appreciate it. So probably while we get the connection problem solved, and even though I do not see questions posted in the chat box, unless there's any question that I am not able to understand, probably we may start by closing. Hello. Yes.
Sorry, I was cut off. Am I back? We still,
okay.
Can we still, you hear me, Sandra?
We are hearing you cutting out a little bit, and we cannot see your screen. But I think you can, okay, I think you're starting to share now.
Yeah, I turn off my video. Okay, my bio have been informed by Sandra earlier. So just a bit, one slide to understand about Gakas Lab. Gakas Lab established in 1977.
Any possibility that you can open your camera so we may facilitate the work of the interpreters?
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
So I'm continue. The Gakas Lab is end-to-end medical device industry association. Our member is doing the R&D and after-sales services. We have more than 1,000 members, and we have 21 committees in provinces of Indonesia. We have a broad network locally and internationally. So what about the topic good regulatory practice? Where is Indonesia? Let me explain about the situation before COVID. We have adopted ASEAN Medical Device Directives in 2017, as explained earlier by Pak Fikri. We have implemented license of establishment for medical device production and distribution. We have implemented ASEAN CSDT, as well as earlier mentioned, explained by Pak Fikri. Regarding GMP and GDP, which is consistent with ISO 13485, GMP certification is not yet a prerequisite for medical device license application, but the operation is based on the GMP and ISO 13485 system already. What about during COVID? During COVID, there is a relaxation period because we need more on product waiver of license of establishment registration, especially for a COVID-19 product. Accelerated license of establishment approval, accelerated product license approval process as well. What about after, or even though still in the pandemic, but we can say after the COVID-19, we're still in the relaxation period. Registration of production facility is moved under Ministry of Industry based on the OSS RBA, which is explained earlier by Pak Fikri. GMP and GDP-MD will soon become the requisite for medical device license applications. Pre-market system is guided by ASEAN CSDT as before as COVID-19. But how confident is Indonesia versus the rest of the world? Let me explain about the framework first from industry point of view. So regarding the establishment, now the business license via one single submission system, standard certification issued by Ministry of Industry for manufacturing, and then distribution license issued by Ministry of Health for distribution, and then GMP and GDP certification by Indonesian MOH. The pre-market registration at Indonesian MOH, ASEAN CSDT is referred, MDD, MDR, PMA, FDA format is acceptable, compatible, and ISO 14155 is recognized for medical clinical trial. Regarding quality management system, ISO 13485 is adopted for GDP-MD and GMP-MD. What about the post-market? Reporting system for product distribution via e-report and mobile Alkes app. Field action is mainly performed by So, in a nutshell, Indonesia is among the most mature countries in Asia on regulatory framework, except for some local requirement. The next slide I will explain. Indonesia is to move forward. Regulatory convergence as international standard have been recognized and adopted. So as mentioned earlier by Pak Fikri, actually Indonesia is one member of EMDD and also Global Health Harmonization Working Group as well. Some non-convergent requirement which just need to be bear in mind is inclusion of product as medical device. In some product as hospital furniture, toothbrush, vending napkin, etc. is still medical device in Indonesia, while other countries is considered as not medical device. But the other thing, some product is considered is medical device in other country according to MDD, but Indonesia is classified as drug. The sample is artificial tear for eye. GMP, GDP-MD certification, ISO 13485 and ISO 101 will be advantage for certification process, but not yet directly accepted because the program still in under review, but probably soon will be accepted as a accelerated for GMP and GDPMD certification. This is also the thing that probably to complete the picture of the puzzle of the picture, additional quality requirements still being asked by other division of MOH and other ministries like a PQS, WHO certification, other standard requirement for procurement. Experience with Indonesian current process and standard pre-market requirements still follow ASEAN CSDD guideline. However, success criteria set by local lab for testing is still reported to be inconsistent, which is still need to be improved. Indonesian clinical trial guideline and process acknowledge ISO 14155. However, some drug clinical trial concept is still adopted because not yet many clinician or hospital understood about the difference of medical device clinical trial compared to drug clinical trial. The existence of CRO with specialized in MD medical device is still very rare here in Indonesia, which is still opportunity for medical device CRO come to Indonesia. Indonesia medical device system relies on pre-market much more than post-market. Post-market system is mostly initiated by MOH. The practice process such as field safety corrective action by industry and adverse event report by user are not yet effectively executed. This is also the thing that need to be improved because this is directly impact for the development of a quality for local product of medical device in Indonesia. Indonesia has strong ground to move forward regulatory convergence, but needs to catch up in some areas to balance the entire medical device system. So the convergence will benefit the system. In my humble opinion, also the system of convergence needs to be balanced between the imported product and also the resiliency of local product in Indonesia. Will regulatory convergence be advantage for any good for increased opportunity for exportation because it create because then the product will be accepted by other countries. Eliminate cost duplication, like earlier mentioned or explained by Frédéric, that the cost also being effective if there is a elimination of duplication. Facilitate information sharing, certainly the other countries' information about the situation in other countries, especially in this region. And then the convergence is incentive for foreign investment, like mentioned earlier by Pak Fikri. It is important to invite multinational or big players to come to Indonesia, either open the manufacturing facility or be consider Indonesia as some part of a production supply chain to their product. What to avoid certainly is to not become the disadvantage for local medical device manufacturing, because Indonesia now still moving toward to medical device residency. The regulatory convergence should not become barrier to medical device innovation. Still need to consider local design as a source of a product medical device in Indonesia. Regulatory convergence should not be the medical device cost when not interpreted well, because otherwise it will be more and more difficult and more additional cost to fulfill the requirement. Last slide, probably our take-home message. Regulatory system is required to guide the medical device system. However, as medical device industry must be more agile post-COVID-19 era, regulatory convergence should facilitate faster regulatory support for innovation. And then, especially in this region, including Indonesia, probably must have their basic regulatory system, both pre and post market, while moving toward the regulatory convergence. And then the last one, implementation of regulatory convergence must consistently involve academia and industry in order to avoid counterproductive, which is later on may slow down the country's medical device system and local product of medical device. I think that's all what I can give to share in this session. Back to you, Sandra. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your sharing. I think it was also very, very valuable information. And I think that part of what Fred was mentioning during his intervention that is related to communication and transparency in making it very clear what are the expectations from every stakeholder as to make sure that the decisions that are made are into the benefit of, again, the patients. And of course, for them to be benefited, all stakeholders have to take a role on the decisions that are made. So in that regard, I think it has been really great to learn these different perspectives from a member of MDSAP and a very experienced regulator as is Health Canada, but in regards of the utilization of ISO 13485 and of course an active founder member of the MDSAP program, all the efforts that the Ministry of Health is putting in place as to promote manufacturing, local manufacturing, but at the same time, focusing on not developing local unique regulations that would prevent for those efforts to succeed. And making all these efforts towards convergence is definitely going to be something that will end up facilitating the local production in Indonesia. And of course, listening to the industry perspective and what are key elements for industry to feel safe and to find a way to bring to the Indonesian patients the medical devices that are in need. So let me just get into one of the questions that we got posted, and I'm going to start with this one because this is in English and I'm only able to kind of speak English, and my apologies for that. So we have a question posted by Elias Palante from Universitas Hasanuddin, and what he is saying is, I am the senior researcher focusing also in developing various medical appliances. Right now, we are working together with 3 specialized medical doctors as our consultant in a very young startup. Is there any supporting programs available there we could utilize help to boost our activities? Please feel free to provide me the constructive responses of my question from all speakers. So we may probably get started with you, Fred. Challenging one, but.
Thank you, Sandra. Well, first of all,
hello,
it's great to see that you know, this innovation development happens everywhere, and again, this just, you know, speaks to the point that I had made earlier, that a lot of this innovation, a lot of these companies, they're not these big global transnational corporations that we're familiar with some of the names. They're small organizations like that, and this is an example of the challenges that are faced by the industry. And so in terms of programs that can help with that, I mean, from my end, I think what we try to do as much as possible is to make the resources available. So from a convergence point of view, we put out, for instance, all the expectations for, you know, what would be equivalent to the GMP inspection, so under MDSAP. So as you focus moving forward on, you know, even thinking of what are some of the best practices to put in place in terms of, you know, that the quality management, and again, setting these things up earlier in the production, because some companies run into challenges when they do that quality work and some of this more concrete work very late in the game, and it's very hard for them to go back and recreate some of these things, right? So for instance, one of the big things that we know is very impactful in design, in device safety, is design and design controls, right? So designing for safety, that means creating a framework for designing. And so that is part of the discipline that comes with the quality system. And we put those things out there. So for instance, when you go to the MDSAP website, you can see, for instance, what our MDSAP approach is. What are the requirements, at least within the consortium, around design controls? What are the expectations? What are some of the best practices? That can begin to inform you in terms of, maybe not today when you're in the very early, for instance, R&D stage, where you're doing proof of concept type research. But when you're thinking about what the next step is going to look like moving towards commercialization, it can give you a broader view of what comes along. And you can start thinking about what are some of the things that we are going to have, some of the milestones that we're going to have to consider as we move forward in this journey of commercialization. And as I mentioned, the sooner you put these things in, the sooner you start considering these things, the easier it will become in the future. Because unfortunately, man is great, but we don't have time machines yet. We cannot go back and recreate things that we wish would have been able to. And the beauty of the quality management system, and again, when you look at 1345 as a standard, when you look at the forward, it says that the goal of the standard is for organizations that need to be able to demonstrate to regulators and stakeholders their practices and the safety of their products. So that's a great tool to start building that case for a longer term commercialization of the product. And using a converged standard like 1345 means that opens the avenue to not just locally in Asia, but as you move towards other markets, you're using something, it's sort of like a common language. In many places, people understand 1345, they understand those requirements, it's familiar to them. It's very familiar to me. I couldn't tell you which article the Brazilian GMP requirement says what, but I know that it matches up with 1345 and I can speak to that. So it becomes sort of like the English language of quality management that everyone sort of speaks, even though we have our own language at home. So I think that's maybe one of the ways that you can help from a forward-moving planning perspective. And again, it will help you, I think, identify areas where, in terms of collecting data, post-market data or signals for safety and data analysis and things like that, that come into play. Again, starting to think of these things early always makes the work much easier down the line.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think it was really very valuable, the feedback that you have already provided to Elias. I think that Fikri is still in the line. So if you're still there,
yes.
And you would like to comment, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elias. So yeah, one of the things that we are aiming to do as well is the ADGC synergy. So academic, business, government, and community. So it's really exciting time how like the collective response, collective actions of this whole quadripartite, the four components of the not only research and then the manufacturers and the regulatory sides of it can come together and build a better medical devices system. So it's really supported by the government, by Elias. Like it is really important. You can communicate with us as well what the research about, especially if it is really supporting the health transformation agenda. And as the Frédéric mentions, it is really important as well if we use the global standard that is already there, ISO 13485, and then it is really specific for that. It is like electromedic. You can check the IEC standard as well in there if it is related, and make sure it fall into biocompatibility and the clinical evaluation standard as well if it is a higher risk. So just keep connected with us. And I'm afraid I have really to go now. Thank you very much, everyone. And
thank you,
Fikri. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much. Thank you.
Thank you. And now probably real quick, Randy, if you can help us with some final remarks, may we move to the next panel?
Yeah, Pak Elias, let me explain Pak Elias answer in bahasa Indonesia ya. Pak Elias, itu sebenarnya kalau Bapak cari program Bapak mengenai pendanaan bisa ke kedai reka, Pak. Itu ada di bawah Kementerian Ristek. Ya, Kementerian Pendidikan dan Ristek itu ada dana kedai reka yang bisa Bapak pakai. Akan tetapi memang tadi yang disampaikan Pak Frédéric dan Pak Fikri, ini harus kolaborasi. Bapak yang kurang satu adalah kolaborasi dengan industrinya yang sudah siap, karena itu dari awal ya. Karena memang yang pengalaman kami dari Gakislab pada kolaborasi itu. Jadi yang penting juga nanti Bapak harus kenal alat yang Bapak inovasi ini masuk medical device atau bukan. Karena kalau bukan medical device lebih gampang, jalan tol istilahnya. Tetapi kalau medical device lain lagi, harus hati-hati. Pengalaman kami di Gakislab, ada banyak produknya ternyata medical device, sehingga harus dibuat dari awal, karena mengumpulkan data teknisnya berbeda antara data untuk jualan dengan data untuk mengkonstruk dossier berdasarkan ISO 13485 yang tadi diterangkan Pak Frédéric. Jadi harusnya lebih baik dari awal. Kalau kami dari Gakislab, kita saat ini memang belum sampai ke Makassar. Kami sudah punya kolaborasi dengan 11 perguruan tinggi di Pulau Jawa. Nanti sebentar lagi mungkin kami ke Makassar, ke Hasanuddin, Pak ya, supaya kita nanti bisa mulai dengan program pelatihan dan sebagainya. Kalau regulasinya ada Pak, ada Inpres 6 2016, ada Kemenkes 17 2017. Saya kira itu aja. Nanti kita bisa komunikasi lebih lanjut, Pak Ilyas. Terima kasih.
Iya, mohon izin Pak Randi. Mohon izin Pak Randi. Jadi saya nanti kontak Pak Randi ya. Mungkin Julai
boleh, Pak.
Julai Agustus.
Boleh.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I mean, unfortunately, we are running out of time. We are really very appreciative of all the feedback that we receive, all the very valuable information that our subject matter experts had already shared with us. I think Indonesia is right now kind of like in a unique position, looking forward to developing local manufacturing. And in that regard, whenever we think about being aligned with international standards, that will not only benefit the local population, but financial-wise, it will also open opportunities for the manufacturers to think also on exporting, and that is something that is always beneficial for the countries, and at the end of the day, for patients, not only in Indonesia but in other parts of the world. So really, thank you very much, Fred, Randy, for your insights, and back to Mugant for us to get started with our next panel on post-market surveillance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sandra, Frédéric, Pak Fikri, and Pak Randy. Before we move on, I do want to point out Melissa Torres from the Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration was supposed to be on this panel, but she was unable to join us. She has very graciously prepared a presentation that we will be uploading onto the resource website. Her presentation covers proposed amendments to the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21, Part 820 on Quality Management System Regulation, and a review of the ISO 13485 Quality Management System for medical devices as well. So please do check that out after this webinar. Our next panel is on post-market surveillance in Indonesia. It will discuss international post-market surveillance standards, WHO guidance for incident reporting and handling, and Indonesia's domestic post-market surveillance requirements, including the role of the public and private sector in meeting medical device safety and standards. Moderating the panel, we have Pak Wirabrata, Head of the Center for Health Security System Policy and Health Resources, along with the panelists Mark Swanson from QRX Partners, our expert on ISO guidance on post-market surveillance for manufacturers, Anita Sands, Technical Officer, Incidents and Substandard of Falsified Medical Products Team from the World Health Organization, Pak Heru Sunario, Head of Medical Devices Product Supervision from the Ministry of Health Indonesia, and Pak Erwin Hermanto, Vice Chairman, ASPACI. Pak Wirabrata, the floor is all yours.
Yeah. Hello, good morning. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Megan. Ladies and gentlemen, this panel session is post-market surveillance in Indonesia. My name is Wirabrata, moderator this section. This panel will discuss current post-market surveillance development in Indonesia, including manufacturers, responsibility and collaboration between regulator and industry in meeting medical device safety and standards. The panel will reference MDRF requirements for post-market surveillance and WHO guidance on post-market surveillance and market surveillance of medical devices, including in vitro diagnostic. This panel speakers are Mr. Mark Swan, ISO 2020 medical device post-market surveillance for manufacturers, and Anita Sen, technical officer, incident and substandard wholesale medical product team, WHO. Pak Heru Sunario, head of medical device product supervision, Ministry of Health Indonesia, and Pak Erwin Hermanto, Vice Chairman Aspaki. Yeah, and question and answer for the discussion for 15 minutes. Please, the speaker, the first to Pak Mark Swanson, please. Time is yours.
Thank you. This is Mark Swanson talking here from the U.S. So I'm exactly 12 hours off from where you are. So it's 10 p.m. at night here in Minneapolis, in the middle of the U.S. I was a participant throughout the development of the post-market surveillance guidance document, ISO TR 20416. That's been is kind of used as the international guidance document on post-market surveillance. One of the goals of this ISO technical report and the guidance document really was to provide guidance for manufacturers on conducting post-market surveillance operations, and particularly the connection to both risk management and product improvements as we continue to monitor the product in the post-market, after product release. This is to ensure that there is that proactive feedback, that we're actually gathering information on the product performance and safety to ensure that it continues to improve. While it's not a directly required standard, it does provide good information for manufacturers to meet the regulations both in Europe as well as the US, looking for real world evidence and the supporting clinical evidence that's generally required to ensure that your product is safe and effective. And so these various pieces now, we weren't aimed at meeting any regulations for any particular region, but rather, again, providing guidance on how to meet the various regulations in the different areas. This includes Indonesia, Japan, as well as all the other geographies that are looking to make sure that you ensure that your product is performing as you expected and that there aren't any product safety requirements. And with that, then I'll yield back the time and understand what the other people have to present.
Ria, I think you might be on mute.
Are there the other panelists that have something else to add?
If you can give us just a minute, it seems that we are having some technical difficulties for Wira to open his microphone. Mugant, probably while we find a way to solve the microphone issue, we could probably continue with Anita.
Yes, Anita, you have the floor. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, hello everyone. My name's Anita Sands and I have a presentation. Is that queued up, ready to go, or should I share my screen?
Let us pull that up for you.
Wonderful. So while that's happening, good morning, everyone. It's about 5 a.m. Here in Geneva, Switzerland. My name's Anita Sands. I work for the World Health Organization and I have the responsibility for medical devices, including IVDs, within the regulation and pre-qualification department, and the work that we do on substandard and falsified medical products. So I do have a slide deck. I'm going to be a bit more formal. It's maybe the WHO way, and explain a little bit to you about the work that we've done related to post-market surveillance and the services that we can provide to manufacturers, to regulators, and to users of devices. So if you could just put that into full screen mode and go to the next slide, please. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. Okay, so WHO released normative guidance in 2 different versions over the past decade. Our first guidance on post-market surveillance was really more related to IVDs, and in 2019, sorry, we expanded the scope to include all medical devices. And we also made sure it was clear that we were talking about both post-market surveillance and market surveillance. So the normative guidance is without prejudice to national legislation. So if you have your own national legislation and you have your own documented procedures and they're implemented, this is just for countries that maybe do not have that yet, or countries that want to move towards more of a globally recognized standard. It's a way in which, thank you. It was a way in which one can sort of bring all of the documents together that exist in the public domain, and really try to have a document that could be also suitable for policymakers trying to understand the space. We describe post-market surveillance for manufacturers, user feedback, market surveillance for regulators, including any kind of testing capacity. And it's multilingual. It's available in all 6 UN languages, unfortunately not Indonesian. And it's available under the health topic, substandard and falsified medical products, on our website. Next slide, please. So why did we do an update? Well, it was actually to reflect the new ISO guidance, as well as to make sure that the IMDRF guidance, the N43 document on adverse event reporting terminology, was reflected in WHO's guidance. We also made sure we could expand this to be a little bit more inclusive about other economic operators other than the legal manufacturer, so authorized contacts, agents, wholesalers, etc. And we also looked at revising the timelines for reporting. Unfortunately, this is almost impossible to harmonize worldwide. We feel that we struck a balance. Even within the IMDRF countries, there is not currently harmonization or convergence, what I say. We also made sure that we were really distinct in our terminology. We moved away from using the word complaint handling and more towards this concept of user feedback, which I think really mirrors ISO 20416, because it really uses similar language. And also to be really distinct about post-market surveillance as distinct from market surveillance. Next slide, please. So in terms of what would be our expectations of manufacturers, I really don't think much with this might be new to you as manufacturers, but I do sometimes feel that for regulators and other stakeholders in the space, there's a bit of a confusion about what post-market surveillance is, and they often think it's something that the regulator does, and it's about testing. And we want to be really clear that this is really the role and responsibility of the manufacturer to collect and analyze experiences, both negative and positive, about their product once it's placed on the market. We have a section where we support that manufacturers have a post-market surveillance plan, and it's very much mirrored on the ISO requirements, and very much around being both reactive, so reacting to complaints, but also looking at technical service, maintenance, and all those other ways you get user feedback in a more maybe reactive way, sorry, a proactive way, but then also the really proactive around looking at the scientific literature, looking at your production records, conducting post-market performance follow-up to try to be able to detect any potential issues with your product well before it actually has a harm at the patient level. The other main aspect of this is about determining when you should report an event or an incident to a regulator. Now, at the WHO level, that means that we deal with many regulators, and obviously in Indonesia you have BOMRA, so you would be working directly with them. But in the WHO jurisdiction, you know, obviously that same product might also have been on the market in other jurisdictions, and we are obviously looking to make sure that all jurisdictions, not just the one where the complaint was issued or where the incident happened, are informed. We're also obviously expecting root cause analysis and corrections or corrective and preventive actions. Next slide. I think it's really important to understand that post-market surveillance, next slide please. Next slide, please.
Slide, please.
Yeah. And I'm back one slide, please. Back one slide, please. Thank you. And apologies to the translators if I'm speaking quickly here, but we wanted to make sure that we placed post-market surveillance within the ecosystem of all of the other stakeholders. And we have a big section on what should regulators do. I won't go into as many details about that today, but that's really about placing the responsibility for investigating an incident and using risk management principles to determine if a correction or a corrective action needs to be taken. But the regulator is a really important arbitrator to ensure that the procedures that have been presumably reviewed in some way when the product is placed on the market, in terms of customer feedback and complaint handling, that you actually execute those. So we're looking to review investigation reports and field safety corrective actions. And the other important role a regulator has is to share that information with other regulators as required, and certainly to make sure that any information that is of public notice or public concern should be, such as a field safety notice, should be available in a public repository, preferably the internet, obviously, so it can be found and it can be translated if it is indeed in Bahasa and not in English or in any of the other languages in Indonesia. And obviously the users of devices are really, their main role here is to detect an issue. They have an important role to be supported, to be able to feel comfortable to report issues. That's why we call it feedback issues. You know, we don't want to, we've moved away from this language complaints because it does sound a little bit negative. And we found that the feedback from our normative guidance was that users were really reluctant to tell manufacturers when there was a complaint, and particularly if the product had not been purchased by them, but had maybe been donated or had been purchased under a donor agreement, to not complain. I think we all are told that by our families, don't complain. But in this case, it's really important, and making sure that device users act on the advice of the manufacturer. Next slide, please. So in terms of what does WHO do to facilitate this, we have a list of pre-qualified products, and for emergency use listing, we also have a list of products. And in many countries, these lists are actually used for reliance for market authorization. So if a product is pre-qualified, the full assessment pre-market may not need to be done, which means that we have an obligation to also make sure that we require manufacturers fulfill certain reporting requirements, and that's outlined in this document. And I know that you may have had a presentation last week or the week before from my colleague Agnes Kidjo, who also is supporting the regulatory strengthening space that WHO has. And I am the bridge between the pre-qualified products and the regulatory strengthening space. And we have a range of tools, and I call it here the alphabet soup, but there are a whole range of normative functions that WHO supports, as well as a more practical procurement. And here I have the link for any field safety notices or WHO info notices. So the field safety notices are those at the manufacturer issues, and the info notices are available on our website for any PQ'd or emergency use listed products. And that's an important resource, we think. Next slide, please. So in terms of what does WHO do in terms of global incident reporting, and how do we support member states who want to start this up? We have what's called the Global Surveillance and Monitoring System for substandard and falsified medical products. It is currently operational for medicines and vaccines and IVDs. So the scope is a little bit restricted for medical devices at the moment. However, in reality, this is my daily job, and I am. We have been certainly receiving incidents related to in injection equipment that's used in vaccines, which is a medical device. So we are also able to handle those types of incidents, but primarily it's been developed for medicines, vaccines, and IVDs. We have been given this mandate by the WHO member states. We have what's called a mechanism where the member states participate and guide the work the WHO does. And that's important because what that means is the member states see that this is something that needs to have an oversight at a global level. It's something where there needs to be a facilitation for member states to be able to come together to share information. In some of the smaller countries, it's almost, it's very difficult to have the resources to be able to manage all of the incidents. And so there is an element of reliance, which we'd like to start to build into vigilance and market control. So we do collect incidents for all pre-qualified products and emergency use listed products. Obviously, this is a bit confidential, but I can say to you that we do use the IMDRF codes for adverse event reporting. We encourage all of our manufacturers to use that coding. That does enable us to be better able to share information and, of course, to do data analyses. Next slide, please. But we do see that this is a space where we probably need to think about innovation. And certainly the COVID-19 pandemic shone a highlight, well, it highlighted that sometimes a full market assessment pre-market for market authorization is just not possible. And one has to rely much more on post-market surveillance and market surveillance than on pre-market, or else we just don't get access to products. And I think this balance needs to be reevaluated. We put so much emphasis on the market authorization when indeed perhaps we could start to balance it out a bit more, because we know that there will always be issues come up in the post-market phase. There are things we didn't anticipate, even if we planned for them in our risk management and our design dossiers and design control plans. You can still have information that can help you. So we had an innovation internally here in WHO, and I entered that to try to look at what were ways we could enhance feedback on quality and safety of IVDs. And this is actually something you could use for medical devices, but I started with IVDs. And it was, how can we use traceability, so unique device identification, to be able to help users to be able to quickly and easily both authenticate a device, maybe trace a device or verify a device, but also how could we use this to detect falsified devices, because they're certainly out there in the marketplace, and how to report feedback about substandard. We often find it's difficult to get information about the product, the lot number, the expiry date, and this lag in time means it takes longer and longer for the manufacturer to get the information, to get the feedback. We find countries often want to do an investigation, and I say, no, just document. What lot numbers? What happened? What was the event? What was the clinical signs and symptoms? What was the health impact? And so we developed this dashboard that's based on blockchain actually in the back end. And what it allows is that it's a distributed network that's encrypted, but for a product that you know to be regulated on your market, as a manufacturer or as a regulator, you would get a dashboard where you could see at a glance all of the feedback about your product, and you can start to sort through. And in this column here, you see green, you see red and yellow. And obviously red is higher risk with higher impact and harm at patient level. And the green is obviously lesser because maybe you don't know about the impact or you can't quantify it. And then we have the A codes to understand false negative, false positive, etc. This is something that's still a prototype, but it's something that I'm presenting as perhaps a point of interest for both regulators and manufacturers, and certainly for users, to try to see if we might be able to make these global reporting incident systems much more user-friendly. Next slide, please. I'm nearly finished. I just have 2 more slides. So we also have a big piece of work on traceability. It's mainly written around medicines and vaccines, but I'd say that a lot of the principles are completely applicable to medical devices. We have a policy paper which we released last 2020, and I made sure there was an annex written for medical devices. And we want to make sure that traceability is interoperable for medicines, vaccines, and medical devices, but also across member states. We saw this with the COVID vaccine rollout. We needed to know where product was when. The same goes for medical devices. It's really important for inventory management to understand shortages, but also if you need to do field safety corrective actions to go back and find that product. And just to say that we don't recommend any one standard organization that we propose. As you can see here, we have a range of those, and that's based on IMDRF. Next slide, please. So just to say what is the sort of takeaway from WHO. Next slide, please. In terms of how would we support users, manufacturers, and NRAs to implement incident handling. So I mentioned here cervical cancers because it's a particular interest and priority of our Director General. So if you have to start somewhere, you can start with some programs. Cervical cancer elimination has moving away from cytology and to IVDs and moving towards more of a test and treat or a test and triage, where thermal ablation devices can be used at the point of care for women. And so we're looking at trying to start somewhere, or you might want to start more broadly in all hospitals. But how do you want to make sure that users know how to report issues with devices to manufacturers, and then that manufacturers or their local authorized representatives must be obliged to report incidents to the respective NRA. In this case, it's in Indonesia, and that also field safety corrective action. So it's not always that a corrective action comes out of an incident. It may be for another reason based on risk management within the scientific literature, your production records, etc. Agnes would have talked to you about the global benchmarking tool. It's a really important resource, along with that post-market surveillance and market surveillance guidance for regulators, and actually for everyone in the post-market space to understand what is it that we desire in a way, or we're recommending is another word, regulators to have in place for regulation of medical products. And we've just expanded this tool to include medical devices. And I've got the wrong picture here, but I've got the right link down here, where you can go and see for market surveillance, for vigilance, what would we expect of a regulatory authority? But really underpinning all this is reliance and recognition, and having a good relationship with other regulators who might be also receiving incidents about products that are on the market in Indonesia. And my last slide is just to say thank you and to give you my email address. You can contact me if you have any issues or questions, of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Anita Sen, for your presentation. Now we continue the speaker. Mr. Maxwan, are you ready for this time? The slide, Mr. Maxwan, already?
I think we can continue with Heru Sunario.
Heru, okay. Yes, continue. This speaker panelist is Heru Sunario from Ministry of Health. He is a head of medical device product supervision. Yes, please, Pak Heru.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Wira untuk kesempatannya. Izin pakai bahasa Indonesia saja, Pak Wira.
Silakan Pak Heru. Silakan.
Ya, slide saya mohon, Bapak Ibu. Panitia. Ya, Bapak Ibu sekalian yang saya hormati, Pak Wira dan juga narasumber yang lain serta peserta. Ya, izinkan saya Heru Sunario dari Direktorat Pengawasan Alat Kesehatan, Kementerian Kesehatan akan menyampaikan terkait pengawasan alat kesehatan yang kita lakukan atau yang menjadi kebijakan yang berjalan di Indonesia. Oke, next slide berikutnya.
Maybe the slideshow, please.
Ya, oke. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, ini adalah cycle terkait alat kesehatan yang berlaku di Indonesia. Jadi hampir sama sebenarnya tadi yang kita lihat di WHO juga, bahwa yang pertama dimulai dari conception dan development, yaitu mulai dari pengembangan, kemudian desain, dan juga berikutnya setelah itu dilakukan proses produksi oleh manufacturing, kemudian dilanjutkan dengan proses packaging dan labeling. Di sini juga sangat menjadi perhatian karena packaging dan labeling ini ada aturan tersendiri. Dan di Indonesia kita mengenal 3 proses ini, 3 alur ini atau 3 cycle ini menjadi bagian dari pre-market. Kemudian dilanjutkan lagi advertisement atau iklan. Di sini juga menjadi sangat penting karena regulasinya juga ada di kita dan kita atur. Kemudian ada sale di sini terkait penjualan dan beberapa dilakukan aturan-aturan terkait penjualan juga ada. Kemudian berikutnya lagi adalah use, yaitu penggunaan di fasilitas pelayanan kesehatan. Di sini juga ada regulasi yang mengatur hal tersebut. Dan yang terakhir terkait disposal atau penghapusan. Ini sangat penting karena alat kesehatan merupakan produk yang bersifat khusus dan cemarannya juga cukup tinggi sehingga ada aturan yang mengatur hal tersebut. Dan di Indonesia kita mengenal ada pre-market dan post-market. Bagian yang pre-market kita mulai dari 1, 2, dan 3, yaitu dari proses conception, development, sampai kemudian manufacturing dan packaging. Kemudian post-market kita di Indonesia mengenal hanya 2, yaitu pre-market dan post-market. Kalau post-market kita mengenal ada mulai dari pengiklanan, kemudian penjualan, penggunaan, sampai dengan penghapusan. Itu kita kenal sebagai post-market. Oke, lanjut. Next slide, please. Ya, Bapak Ibu sekalian yang saya hormati, di dalam pengawasan alat kesehatan di Indonesia kita memiliki tujuan sesuai dengan Undang-Undang 36 tahun 2009 tentang kesehatan. Di situ jelas menyebutkan bahwa alat kesehatan yang beredar di Indonesia itu harus aman, kemudian bermutu dan berkualitas. Dan itu menjadi tujuan daripada pengawasan alat kesehatan yang kita lakukan. Dan dalam rangka untuk pengawasan alat kesehatan, kita ada beberapa aktivitas atau kegiatan yang kita lakukan. Dan sebenarnya kalau kita lihat tadi penyampaian dari Ibu Anita tadi, Miss Anita Sen tadi dari WHO juga menyampaikan inilah kegiatan yang kita lakukan. Jadi sebenarnya sama ya. Kita juga mengacu dari WHO. Jadi yang pertama adalah terkait audit ya, audit CPAKB. Ini audit CPAKB, kemudian audit CDAKB itu kita lakukan di proses awal ya, nantinya di akhir tahun 2023 ini kita harapkan CP dan CD itu menjadi sesuatu yang dilakukan dari awal atau harus dipenuhi dari awal, yaitu slide-nya mungkin bilang. Ya, jadi audit CPAKB dan CPPKRTB, kemudian CDAKB, itu merupakan penilaian penerapan sistem manajemen mutu di sarana produksi dan distribusi alat kesehatan. Jadi kita harus memastikan di awal bahwa sarananya tersebut memang memenuhi persyaratan dari sistem manajemen mutu. Kemudian dilanjutkan dengan kita lakukan inspeksi ke fasilitas atau inspeksi ke sarana, yaitu memastikan sarana produksi dan distribusi itu tetap untuk memenuhi persyaratan perizinan yang tadi dipersyaratkan di CP maupun JD tadi. Kemudian kita juga mengenal adanya sampling dan testing. Jadi setiap produk alat kesehatan yang beredar itu harus memiliki izin edar, kemudian jaminan tadi keamanan, mutu dan manfaat itu kita harus lakukan sampling dan testing. Dan kita setiap tahun ada sampling dan testing yang dilakukan, yaitu meliputi ada beberapa produk dan untuk tahun ini sampai dengan tahun 2024 kita ada indikator, kita prioritaskan sampling dan testingnya itu untuk kelas C dan D sebagai prioritas. Di mana sampling dan testing ini kita melakukan sampel, pengambilan sampel di sarana produksi dan distribusi, dan juga yang ada di peredaran, kemudian kita dilanjutkan ke pengujian ke laboratorium yang terakreditasi. Yaitu pengujian kesesuaian. Yang kita lakukan pengujian di sini adalah dalam rangka untuk pengujian kesesuaian mutu dan keamanan daripada alat kesehatan, yaitu sesuai dengan standar atau ketentuan yang berlaku. Kemudian ada kegiatan berikutnya yaitu pengawasan iklan. Tadi di cycle tadi juga muncul tentang iklan ya. Bahwa kita juga melakukan pemantauan iklan yang memenuhi kaidah yang objektif, lengkap dan tidak menyesatkan. Artinya iklan-iklan yang disayangkan dalam rangka untuk iklan untuk medical device atau untuk alat kesehatan itu harus memenuhi 3 kaidah tadi, yaitu objektif, kemudian lengkap, dan tidak menyesatkan. Dan itu kita lakukan, dan kita juga meng-hire pihak ketiga yang kita bekali untuk melakukan bagaimana melihat iklan-iklan yang ada. Kemudian yang berikutnya terkait pengawasan penandaan atau labeling, di mana labeling tadi juga di cycle tadi itu juga menjadi bagian yang sangat penting, karena ada kaidah di situ juga bahwa penandaan itu harus sesuai dengan ketentuan. Kita ada peraturan menteri yang mengatur tentang hal tersebut. Kemudian berikutnya terkait pengawasan post border, itu merupakan pengawasan tata niaga impor di luar kawasan pabean untuk 81 HSCOT melalui inspeksi on-site. Jadi kita juga melakukan untuk barang-barang atau produk-produk yang import-ekspor itu yang di post border, kita juga melakukan pengawasan. Kemudian berikutnya lagi terkait DUMAS atau pengaduan masyarakat dan juga vigilant. Di sini masyarakat juga kita libatkan dalam rangka pengawasan, karena masyarakat sebagai user ya, dilibatkan dalam rangka pengawasan. Kita fasilitasi, ada aplikasi yang nanti di slide berikutnya juga kita sampaikan bahwa masyarakat itu memiliki hak juga, memiliki kemampuan juga untuk melakukan pengawasan. Dan kita fasilitasi dalam bentuk pengaduan, yaitu aduan atau keluhan masyarakat, maupun juga dari pelaku usaha. Dan biasanya dari pelaku usaha ini yang masuk itu berupa aduan-aduan terkait kompetitornya biasanya. Jadi sesama pelaku usaha mungkin saling mengadukan mungkin terkait kompetitornya. Kalau memang kompetitor tersebut tidak memenuhi ketentuan. Itu hal tersebut ini dalam rangka aduan-aduan tersebut itu dalam rangka adalah untuk jangan sampai menimbulkan terjadinya kejadian tidak diinginkan atau KTD, sehingga dapat menyelesaikan terkait masalah-masalah kalau misalnya ada ditemukan alat kesehatan yang tidak memenuhi standar atau mungkin labeling yang tidak memenuhi standar, mutu setelah dilakukan uji tidak memenuhi standar, itu bisa kita tindak lanjuti. Dan di dalam pengawasan ini kita juga melibatkan berbagai pihak, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Di samping yang pertama adalah dari government, dari pemerintah, yaitu antar kementerian lembaga, kita juga melibatkan terkait misalnya dari Kementerian Perindustrian, Kementerian Perdagangan, Kementerian Kominfo terkait sekarang yang banyak muncul di media-media di marketplace ya, online, penjualan online. Kemudian juga kita melibatkan sektor-sektor yang akademisi dari perguruan tinggi dalam rangka kita juga ada program pengembangan laboratorium untuk mendukung proses pengujian, itu melibatkan akademisi. Kemudian kita juga melibatkan asosiasi, misalnya Gakeslab, kemudian Aspaki kita libatkan. Dan teman-teman dari asosiasi ini sangat mendukung program pengawasan kami. Misalnya kita bekerja sama dalam rangka misalnya untuk pelatihan PJT, itu kita libatkan jadi bersama-sama dengan kami. Dan juga kalau misalnya ditemukan ada sesuatu medical device yang tidak memenuhi syarat, mungkin kita bisa bersama-sama dengan teman-teman asosiasi untuk melakukan pembinaan pada pelaku usaha. Termasuk dengan media sosial, kemudian dengan masyarakat, dan organisasi profesi juga kita libatkan dalam rangka pengawasan alat kesehatan tersebut. Oke, next slide please. Slide. Ya, Bapak Ibu sekalian, dalam rangka untuk mendukung pengawasan yang kita lakukan, kita juga membuat guidance atau petunjuk teknis atau pedoman-pedoman dalam rangka untuk mendukung pengawasan. kita ada beberapa pedoman yang kita buat, jadi sudah cukup banyak pedoman yang kita buat. Ada beberapa contoh petunjuk teknis dan beberapa dalam rangka untuk mendukung kegiatan pengawasan, di mana hal tersebut sebagai acuan kegiatan bagi baik petugas pusat maupun petugas daerah, dan juga tenaga-tenaga pengawas yang ada di lapangan. Diharapkan bisa melakukan pengawasan secara efektif dan efisien. Ini ada beberapa guidance yang kita buat, misalnya pengawasan sarana, jadi juknis untuk pengawasan sarana produksi alat kesehatan dan PKRT. Kemudian ada pelaksanaan petunjuk teknis dalam rangka untuk sampling dan pengujian alat kesehatan. Kemudian ada bagaimana untuk melakukan investigasi terkait kejadian yang tidak diinginkan untuk alkes, dan bagaimana tata cara untuk penarikan dan sebagainya. Buku-buku tersebut atau pedoman-pedoman tersebut atau guidance tersebut kita ambil juga, kita juga mengacu dari beberapa regulasi internasional, misalnya dari WHO, kemudian dari AMDD, kemudian dari APEC, kemudian dari ISO juga kita ngambil, kemudian dari MDRC, kemudian HSA, dan juga pedoman-pedoman atau acuan-acuan internasional yang lain. Dan dalam rangka penyusunan ini juga kita melibatkan tadi kita sampaikan di sebelumnya, yaitu bahwa kita juga melibatkan teman-teman dari akademisi dan juga teman-teman dari asosiasi. Jadi kita bersama-sama untuk menyusun, kemudian kita sosialisasikan, kalau misalnya sudah jadi, kita sosialisasikan kepada para pelaku usaha bersama-sama dengan asosiasi baik Akeslab maupun Aspaki. Kementerian Kesehatan juga, kami juga dalam hal ini memiliki beberapa aplikasi yang menunjang atau yang mendukung pelaksanaan pengawasan. Kita juga punya Regalkes, Info Alkes yang di teman-teman Prodi Salkes, kemudian kita juga punya e-watch dalam rangka untuk tata laksana untuk pelaporan misalnya kejadian yang tidak diinginkan. Kemudian kita punya e-boss border untuk yang dari pengawasan yang di pos border, kemudian ada inspeksi. Ini juga kita udah punya, dan yang terbaru kita punya Alkes Mobile. Ini bisa di-download di Play Store atau Google Store. Dan ini cukup sederhana dan cukup mudah diaplikasikan oleh masyarakat. Bisa juga digunakan dalam rangka untuk pengaduan, terkait aduan untuk alat kesehatan. Kita juga punya aplikasi-aplikasi tersebut. Dan ini semua juga kita desain bersama-sama dengan bantuan dan juga dukungan dari teman-teman dari asosiasi, teman-teman dari para pakar, para praktisi, dan juga para akademisi. Itu kita libatkan dalam rangka untuk menyusun ini sehingga teman-teman pelaku usaha, produsen maupun distributor bisa lebih mudah untuk termasuk bagi kami untuk bisa lebih mudah dalam melakukan pengawasan. Slide berikutnya. Next slide please. Ya, ini terakhir Bapak Ibu terkait tantangan. Jadi ada beberapa tantangan yang dihadapi saat ini dalam melakukan pengawasan di kami, di kita, di Indonesia. Yang pertama adalah terkait limited testing laboratorium. Jadi memang laboratorium kita sangat terbatas, baik swasta maupun pemerintah, dan beberapa uji juga kita lakukan, teman-teman pelaku usaha melakukan uji di luar negeri. Tapi dengan adanya pandemi kemarin memberikan pelajaran yang bagus buat kita, sehingga laboratorium kita juga berkembang cukup pesat, dan kita juga ada program dalam rangka untuk penguatan laboratorium, sehingga diharapkan nanti laboratorium kita memang prioritas kita penguatannya di laboratorium swasta, pemerintah. Diharapkan nanti itu bisa mendukung terkait pengujian untuk mutu. Kemudian yang kedua adalah terkait biaya. Jadi biaya juga masih cukup mahal ya dalam rangka untuk pengujian. Nah, dalam rangka untuk menekan biaya tersebut, kita mengembangkan beberapa lab-lab pemerintah yang diharapkan mampu untuk mendukung pengujian alat kesehatan termasuk PKRT, sehingga biayanya bisa kita tekan menjadi lebih murah. Kemudian jumlah SDM kita juga masih sangat terbatas dalam rangka untuk mengawasi baik sarana untuk produksi maupun distribusi. Ini tidak sebanding ya dengan kecepatan, apalagi dengan kemudahan perizinan dengan OSS RBA yang baru, sehingga kemudahan untuk mengeluarkan izin produksi, kemudian kemudahan dalam izin distribusi, izin edar, ini cukup pesat sehingga kita agak kewalahan dalam rangka untuk melakukan pengawasan, dan SDM kita juga terbatas. Dan itu menjadi tantangan buat kami ke depan. Sehingga mungkin salah satu strategi yang kita lakukan, kita melibatkan pengawas-pengawas atau teman-teman dari provinsi dan juga kabupaten kota untuk bisa membantu dalam rangka untuk pengawasan. Dan juga tadi ada beberapa masih ada beberapa produsen maupun distributor dalam hal ini pelaku usaha yang dalam tanda petik yang mungkin belum memenuhi regulasi yang ada, sehingga ini juga menjadi perhatian buat kami. Mungkin itu yang bisa kami sampaikan, Bapak Ibu sekalian, dari Kementerian Kesehatan dan Direktorat Pengawasan Alat Kesehatan terkait bagaimana kebijakan pengawasan post-market untuk alat kesehatan yang berlaku di Indonesia. Saya kira itu, terima kasih Pak Wira. Saya kembalikan ke Pak Wira.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Heru Sunario atas presentasinya. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now to Pak Erwin Hermanto, Vice Chairman Aspaki. Please, Pak Erwin.
Hi, good morning, Pak Wira Brata, how are you? Good morning, Mr. Mark Swanson. Yeah, this is Pak Wira, is my dear old friend. So good morning to fellow panelists, Mr. Mark Swanson, Ms. Anita Sands, Pak Heru Sunario, also our close friends. I would like to extend my sincere thank you to USA, ANSI, AlphaMed, and the MOH of Indonesia for having Aspaki today. It is indeed a great honor to be here with all of you today. My name is Erwin Hermanto, and I'm the Vice Chairman of the Indonesian Medical Device Manufacturers, so we're known here locally as Aspaki. And today I'm going to be speaking to you about medical device force surveillance in Indonesia. So if Mr. or Ms. Operator, maybe you can help me with the slides, or shall I share this myself, or what will be the protocol, please?
Arvin will screen it for you. Give us a second.
Yeah, many. Thank you. We can jump straight onto the first slides, and I do apologize for the word heaviness, for my slides being a little bit word heavy here today. Maybe you can slide with the first. We can start with the first slide, please. Yeah. So medical device post-market surveillance in Indonesia is under the control of the Surveillance Direktorat of Medical Device and Household Health Supplies in the Ministry of Health of Indonesia. So all manufacturers and their local authorized representative or importers are required to implement this post-market surveillance system in accordance with the ASEAN Medical Device Directive, which came into effect on the 1st January of 2015. However, each ASEAN member state is free in implementing the PMS requirements, and each country has its own specificities. So the Indonesian MOH has harmonized their expectations with the ASEAN guidelines on the post-market vigilance, Annex 5 of the AMDD. At first, events, distribution records, and other required communication with the Ministry of Health is facilitated through the online e-report and e-watch system. Next slide, please. Yeah, so maybe just a quick view of the baseline regulations for post-market surveillance and so forth. So these are basically the regulations, the standards, and the norms imposed by the local government, including the Ministry of Health, for basically surveillance. And this probably had been discussed maybe quite extensively by previous panelists also. So we're just going to skim through it quickly, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so medical device post-market surveillance requirements in Indonesia. So there are 4 pillars to the post-market surveillance system in Indonesia, through which the medical devices are proactively monitored and sampled by the government civil police investigators who are working together with the hospitals and healthcare facilities, police, customs, provinces, health officers, and maybe sometimes even associations. So the 4 pillars are basically the medical device sampling and testing. So periodically, samples of medical devices are picked from the market for laboratory testing to ensure compliance, and any resulting corrective and preventive actions are typically informed to the manufacturer directly or the importer in case of imported products. So the quality management system or QMS auditing periodically being done by the MOH. The MOH typically comes to the factory or to the distribution facilities and perform any sort of audit for compliance to the QMS. So Indonesian Ministry of Health had published a domestic QMS named CPAKB, and for distribution, it's called CDAKB. So we're periodically being audited against those. Adverse event report auditing. So basically, this is a mandatory obligation for distributors, and it's being done via the e-watch system. Advertising and labeling monitoring. The Ministry of Health supervises medical device advertising with related stakeholders and issues public warnings if necessary. So, and manufacturers and importers in Indonesia are required to report the following events through the medical device e-watch system. And the first one is the UE, or as known as unexpected events. So it's referred to as adverse events in the AMDD. And the FSCA, which is field safety corrective actions. So these two are typically being reported via the e-watch system. Importers and distributors are required to submit distribution records through the medical device e-report system to ensure full traceability of the whereabouts of the medical device in case of any recalls. Yeah. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So Indonesian medical device e-watch system. So that's basically the link to the online e-watch system by the Ministry of Health. It is basically a national surveillance, early detection, and alert system for medical devices. It is easily accessed by the public. It contains information on medical devices that may cause or have caused harm to patients, healthcare professionals, or any other affected by the medical device distributed. So users of a medical device, whether it is a patient or healthcare professional, may submit complaints and UEs or unexpected events via this e-watch system. The e-watch system is also used by manufacturers like us and distributors for mandatory reporting of unexpected events, or in Indonesia we call it KTD, or kejadian tidak diharapkan, and field safety corrective actions, or FSCA. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the criteria for reporting unexpected events to the Ministry of Health is as follows. An event has occurred in relation to the use of medical device, or it has caused serious deterioration or serious injury to the other users. It has caused the death of a patient, user, or other person, or it has caused a serious threat to public health with mass impact. Or last but not least, an event could result in death or serious injury to other users if repeated. So the timelines for unexpected event reporting. So number one, if there is a serious threat to public health, it has to be reported within 2 days or 48 hours. If there's death, it's 10 days. Serious deterioration in state of health, 10 days. Possible death or serious injury, if the adverse event were to recur, is within 30 days. Next slide, please. So FSCA reporting. So FSCA is one of the aspects in the Good Distribution Medical Device Directive, or GDPMD, or in Indonesia we call it CDAKB. So that must be met by distributors. Is first, distributors must have standard operating procedure for FSCAs. Distributors shall assign responsibility for planning, implementing, and reporting corrective actions. Distributors shall establish product recall procedures after coordinating with producers or manufacturers. If or when a decision is made to withdraw the product, a recall notification must be made. Distributors must report their planned corrective actions activities to the competent authority. Distributors must inform corrective actions to consumers who have received the products according to the level of importance of FSCA. Records of repair activities must be maintained. Then the adequate corrective actions with respect to the safety and, oops, sorry, I think the slides sort of went away. Yeah. Can anyone still see the slides, or just me?
No, we cannot see them. Just a second, please. They are coming.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. So please allow me to repeat some of the sentence. So adequate corrective actions with respect to the safety and functional aspects of the product shall be determined as soon as possible and implemented in order to eliminate the acute hazard. Necessary actions shall be carried out based on the guidelines from the principal or the manufacturer. Next slide, please. Yeah, so a quick overview on the medical device e-report system. So that's a link to the e-report system by the MOH. So e-report system was practically built to facilitate reporting on the production and distribution of medical devices and household pest supplies, or we call it PKRP in Indonesia. So this is basically is being used by the manufacturers, distributors, and also importers. So the system practically lists all products in circulation in Indonesian market, as well as those that are exported, and facilitates the traceability of the medical device list complaints about the medical device itself and the household health supplies. So it is appointed distributors' responsibility to submit the information to the e-report system. Next slide, please. So I think Pak Heru mentioned this mobile apps called Alkos Mobile in his presentation, and I would like to end my presentation this morning with maybe a mention and a shout out to the Alkos Mobile application as well. So this mobile application has helped us tremendously. So it's basically, it captures not just the e-watch and the e-reporting, but it captures a lot of other applications hosted by the Ministry of Health to assist in essentially the manufacturing and the distribution, traceability, and post-market surveillance of our products in the market. So this, I believe, it has been launched, and we are currently using it quite extensively. And so we would like to say our thank you to the Ministry of Health for making this available to all of us. So that's all from my side this morning, and I do really appreciate the invitation today. So thank you very much again. Ya, saya kembalikan ke. Terima kasih, Pak.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Erwin Hermanto. Thank you very much for your presentation. You have no time, 5 minutes. Yeah. It's okay now. Mr. Mark Svensson, are you ready? The slide ready, Bu Sandra? This is okay.
I'm here. I don't have any formal presentation. I don't know if you heard me talking earlier. I did enjoy each of the presentations that were made. My role in being part of the ISO working group and helping with TR 20416. Again, and having seen the end of the previous presentations on the quality management systems, we didn't put specific requirements that are in the regulations in 20416, but again, providing the examples to gather that proactive feedback, gather the information from production and post-production that follows with ISO 13485, and connecting to those quality systems is much of what was pointed out in the other presentations, in connecting, gathering the information, and then providing that into the rest of the quality management systems for the appropriate actions in risk management and corrections and corrective actions. And so I think all of the presentations have been right on, and I think we can move forward with the Q&A to get us more back on time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mark Svensson, for your explanation. Yeah, okay, right now is the session for discuss. Maybe first I resume to Mrs. Anita Sen, WHO, explain about the new standard ISO 2020, MDRC, and 43, role of the WHO to ensure quality, safety, performance medical device, global surveillance and monitoring system for substandard medical device. We have to innovation, dashboard to monitor feedback and incident report. And so the Pak Heru explanation about the regulatory of medical device of Indonesia, post-market surveillance, quality management audit, and so the mobile medical device guideline and application for the audit and supervision. Pak Irman from Aspaki about the e-watch, auto and experienced event reporting, good distribution medical device directive, and harmony with the MOH Indonesia. And as Mr. Mark mentioned about the ISO 2020, the new standard. Yes, please. Maybe any question from this session for the speakers, please. Yeah, we have nobody. Any question from the audience? I see this. Yeah, Bu Sandra, please. Raise hand, Bu Sandra, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd rather prefer to voice my question comment instead of writing it down if I am allowed. And probably, I mean, I think it is really great work, the one that is being done in Indonesia from the post-market surveillance perspective. And it could be very interesting to learn whether how are you leveraging the work that is being done by other regulators in the world, considering something that I think it was raised very clearly in regards of the costs associated to proper evaluate, to proper running properly conformity assessments, running properly the surveillance systems that are required in order to get into the real understanding on the performance of the devices. So is there a current action that Indonesia is taking us to leverage experiences, evaluation, analysis, data collection that is performed by other regulators in the world?
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Sandra has a question. Please, Minister of Health Indonesia, Pak Heru atau Pak Erwin bisa menyampaikan pembiayaan bagaimana sistem medical device Indonesia terkait dengan bagaimana perizinan, kemudian pengawasannya, about audit. Ya, please, silakan.
Ya, mungkin silakan Pak Erwin dulu. Silakan.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Wira. Untuk pengawasan yang kita lakukan, misalnya kita ada sampling ya, kita ambil contoh misalnya sampling, kita melakukan sampling secara ini ada sampling secara rutin yang kita lakukan setiap tahun. Kemudian dari hasil sampling tersebut kita kemudian melakukan pengujian. Biasanya sampling itu kita lakukan sekaligus dengan pengawasan untuk labeling, untuk labelnya. Apakah label atau data di label itu sudah sesuai dengan pada saat teman-teman waktu melakukan submit di izin edar, itu apakah sama atau tidak, karena aturannya harus sama. Jadi kalau berbeda berarti kita anggap itu substandar. Kemudian kalau misalnya itu terkait label, kalau misalnya terkait labelnya kita kalau misalnya ditemukan yang substandar, itu kita memberikan semacam surat peringatan kepada si pemilik izin edar atau pelaku usaha untuk menyesuaikan, dalam tanda petik untuk menyesuaikan atau memperbaiki label yang salah tersebut. Kemudian kalau misalnya kita lanjutkan dari hasil sampling itu kita lakukan pengujian. Setelah dilakukan pengujian didapatkan kita menggunakan parameter-parameter yang sudah ditetapkan, misalnya untuk masker kita melihat BFE-nya apakah memenuhi standar atau tidak. Kalau misalnya standar yang ditetapkan itu tidak terpenuhi pada waktu pengujian, kita juga memberikan semacam peringatan kepada si pelaku usaha atau pengujian edar untuk melakukan perbaikan mutu. Tadi disampaikan kita biasanya memberikan CAPA ya, corrective action, preventive action. Kemudian dari teman-teman pelaku usaha akan melakukan perbaikan-perbaikan terkait mutu dari produknya tersebut. Itu kita monitor, biasanya kita kasih waktu, kemudian kita monitor. Setelah itu, kalau misalnya perbaikan-perbaikan itu sudah dilakukan oleh teman-teman baik dari pelaku usaha ataupun izin edar, maka terakhir kita akan melakukan evaluasi. Setelah dilakukan evaluasi sudah terpenuhi semua, kemudian dilakukan bahkan biasanya para pelaku usaha itu melakukan uji dan dilampirkan hasil ujinya. Kalau sudah memenuhi standar, kita lakukan close audit. Itu yang biasanya kita lakukan. Jadi seperti itu. Dan biasanya kita juga tetap melakukan komunikasi kepada pemilik izin edar, termasuk untuk memberikan pembinaan-pembinaan terkait untuk pemenuhan standar tersebut. Mungkin itu yang dari kami, Pak Wira. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Pak Heru. Bu Mrs. Sandra, maybe I explain about this cost for the audit from Ministry of Health for medical device. We have the sampling activity from the Ministry of Health to test medical device, use the parameter to compare the standard. So the cost from the activity from the government budget, from the government budget, and so market audit do from the Ministry of Health in the market audit. Ya, silakan Pak Erwin, please.
Yeah, terima kasih, Pak Wira. Thanks for the question, Bu Sandra. It's indeed a loaded question. So let me try to give a perspective from maybe manufacturer side. So the MOH had done a very excellent job in terms of product registrations and getting all the requirements and the process sorted out and simplified. I think the part where it maybe we're a little bit lagging is in terms of product standard. So there's a national standard body or so-called BSN that basically is in charge of national standards. But unfortunately, many medical products in Indonesia have not yet established SNE or national standards. So in lieu of that, basically what has been done is that manufacturers tend to claim compliance against foreign standards, such as maybe MDD from Europe and so forth. And in results, we are very much challenged in terms of providing these supporting documents, especially for testing documents or testing certificates and whatnot, because there's just not that many test labs available in Indonesia. So from cost perspective, typically that is very much the burden at the beginning for the manufacturers to provide the necessary clinical study documents or maybe even test documents. Now, when it comes to post-surveillance, I think Pak Heru and Pak Wira had mentioned this before, that all of this surveillance is being done by the Ministry of Health through the government budgeting system. And, a lot of times there are a lot more of us than actually the MOH surveillance personnel. So it is impossible to expect them to maybe cover everything all at once. So in reality or in practice, associations play some roles in trying to help educate the manufacturers as well as the distributors, so they can follow the proper good manufacturing practice or good distribution practices established by the MOH. That is being done solely on the budget of associations, and each company is expected to essentially spend on regulatory and quality management internally to essentially keep up the quality of their products. So that's practically how it's being done currently. Can it be done better? Of course, yes, but I think it is getting better and better as we go. Then, of course, there are a lot of maybe good practices and whatnot that we can share to forum like this with you or maybe with our counterparts in ASEAN. From the association standpoint, we welcome those kind of collaborations. And I think if it's even possible, maybe Pak Wira, we can do a visit to United States or many other countries, and we try to get some of the case study on what can be done better and what can be improved in terms of post-market surveillance. But in the past 2 years, I would say, because of the COVID situations, we've been pushed to the limits where, I'm sure no one had ever reached before. Pak Wira, back then was handling registration. And I think within a day, he will probably get even hundreds of, registrations requests. They're working day and night and whatnot. And, and of course, at the front line, you have all this surveillance that has to be done to make sure that all of these products are coming in, not only to they're being able to meet the demand, but they're also being able to meet the quality requirements. So, all that being said, I think, the MOH have done tremendously well in the past couple of years to keep everything in check. So I think that's my input. So thank you very much.
Ya, terima kasih banyak. Thank you, Mbak Erwin, for your response. Yeah. Ms. Sandra, do you continue the question or different?
This is a comment on top of that, but probably we can give room for the question from Anita-san, and then I'll complement mine. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Anita-san from the villagers have the question for Pak Heru. Is a sampling and testing of medical device risk-based? Apakah berdasarkan resiko untuk mensampling dari alat kesehatan tadi, Pak Heru? Berdasarkan risiko kah? Atau ada kelas risiko dari alat kesehatan tadi? Ya, silakan Pak Heru.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Wira. Thank you very much, Miss Anita, from your question. Di Indonesia sebenarnya kita untuk tahun ini, di tahun 2022 sampai 2024, kebetulan indikator kinerja kita adalah untuk melakukan sampling dan testingnya itu kita prioritaskan pada kelas alat kesehatan kelas C dan D, yaitu memiliki resiko menengah tinggi dan yang kelas yang tinggi. Dan dari situ kemudian kita juga dalam rangka testing dan sampling itu kita punya juknis ya, juknis tadi yang saya sampaikan, juknis sampling dan juga pengujian ya. Di situ di dalamnya kita ada prioritaskan lagi atau kita pilah-pilah menjadi apa istilahnya kita kriteria lagi. Jadi kelas C, alkes kelas C dan D yang menjadi kriteria sampling, yang pertama misalnya kelas C dan D yang paling banyak digunakan. Itu yang menjadi prioritas kita untuk kita lakukan sampling dan testing. Kemudian yang kedua terkait kebutuhan program. Jadi misalnya saat ini kita lagi prioritas kepada ATM ya, AIDS, TB, malaria. Jadi alkes yang mendukung itu misalnya RDT-nya, rapid diagnostic test-nya untuk AIDS, untuk TB, untuk malaria. Itu juga menjadi prioritas kita untuk sampling dan juga testing. Hanya saja memang kebutuhan lab-nya, dukungan lab-nya yang mungkin perlu juga nanti kita perkuat. Kemudian juga alat-alat kesehatan yang misalnya C dan D yang tahun-tahun lalu itu banyak ditemukan trouble atau masalah. Itu kelas C dan D itu apa alatnya? Itu juga menjadi prioritas kita untuk jadikan menjadi prioritas untuk dilakukan sampling dan testing. Seperti itu Pak Wira. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Heru. Mrs. Anita, do you understand? Maybe I explained about the strategic plan from Ministry of Health. We have the strategy from 2022 and until 2024. Ministry of Health have the priority from the test and sampling for the medical device class C and D. C and D from the they have the guideline, technical guideline from the class C and D from the sampling. And so medical device C and D by program need to test, for example, maybe a program ibu dan anak ya, yeah, from the USG monitor and etc. From the test technical of electrical, yeah, and the others. We have the priority from the test and sampling from the market. Yeah, yeah, Mr. Anita, thank you. Any question? Maybe Mr. Mark, do you have any?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on some of what Irwin had said, and I think because I think it's really important for us to understand that there are several efforts from different industry organizations to ensure that information provided for, that the manufacturers have this information and often gather the information. And here in the US, there's an organization called Medical Device Innovation Consortium. It's a public-private partnership with US FDA. And they have a database called NEST, or NEST CC, where they're gathering information in order to provide that to the public, as well as if you consider, Europe and their move towards what's called the UDAMED database, so that this information can be provided to the various countries and users to understand the performance of the product in post-market surveillance. All of this, while we often look back to the regulators, the Ministry of Health and US FDA and others to try to make sure that the product is safe, I think we have an obligation as manufacturers and organizations to continue to gather that data so that it's available not only to the regulators, but available to our users and the providers of healthcare so that they can make the best choices for their patients. These databases that are existing around the world are very important for us to continue to develop and enhance with that post-market surveillance information.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mark Svensson. This is very important for the information for mass marketing surveillance. Yeah, this is a big data. Yeah, from the manufacturer and so government also for the audit the situation medical device in Indonesia and global. Yeah, to comparison about the Sentinel event situation report from medical device. Yes, another question, maybe the audience.
There is another one from Elias in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Please allow me to ask to Pak Heru. Terkait isu kebijakan laboratorium uji instalasi pemerintah, apakah universitas yang sangat maju dalam aktivitas R&D, innovation and produksi beragam alkes bisa juga didukung Pak Heru dari kebijakan Kemenkes. Nah, mungkin supporting by the government law for the university to laboratory, to support this medical device in Indonesia. Silakan, Pak Heru.
Ya, oke. Terima kasih Pak Wira. Terima kasih Pak Ilyas. Ya, kita sebenarnya ada dua institusi ya. Kebetulan satu Direktur Jenderal. Kita ada namanya Direktorat Pengawasan Alat Kesehatan, itu di tempat kami. Di situ ada pengembangan atau penguatan laboratorium, tapi laboratoriumnya kita penguatannya laboratorium uji. Dalam hal ini kita harapkan memiliki kemampuan untuk uji dari post market. Jadi uji terkait validasi alat kesehatan yang beredar. Kemudian ada satu lagi sebenarnya satu direktorat yang namanya Direktorat Ketahanan, Kefarmasian dan Alat Kesehatan. Nah di situ mungkin Pak Ilyas yang dimaksud yang di situlah. Ya, di itu ada direktorat itu tadi salah satunya adalah dalam rangka untuk mendukung kemandirian untuk alat kesehatan dan juga farmasi. Di situ dibutuhkan riset-riset. Nah lab-lab uji yang mungkin yang dari perguruan tinggi kan sebenarnya laboratorium itu ada dua fungsi, yaitu fungsi pertama adalah sebagai lab uji, dan fungsi kedua adalah sebagai lab untuk riset. Nah, yang fungsi risetnya ini teman-teman dari Direktorat Ketahanan mungkin nanti bisa mendukung dalam rangka untuk pengembangan inovasi produk, terutama kita sekarang inovasi produk untuk dalam negeri. Tapi kebetulan itu satu Direktorat Jenderal Pak Ilyas, jadi nanti silakan ya mungkin untuk komunikasi berikutnya kita siap dari sisi lab ujinya, atau Bapak dari sisi lab R&D-nya. Mungkin seperti itu Pak Wira, terima kasih.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Heru. Saya kira demikian Pak Ilyas. Terima kasih atas pertanyaan dan respon dari Pak Heru. Ya, Mrs. Sandra, please. Yes.
I'm sorry. I was not planning to monopolize the conversation, but I mean, just I would really like to learn from Anita Sands her thoughts in regards of kind of her final comments related to reliance and recognition as compared to the comments provided during this conversation in regards of the challenges that comes from not having sufficient resources to do everything that is required to develop a sufficiently robust post-market surveillance structure. So I don't know, Anita, if you would have some thoughts to share with us.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. I absolutely do, because in much of the support that we give to member states, the question always comes up of, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough finances. How can we possibly sample all the products on our market? And so we really do subscribe to good reliance principles for vigilance and for market surveillance. From the incident reporting side, I think it's very important that information is shared between regulators. So if an incident is reported by your neighbor, that you also have information about it, and vice versa. You might have an incident reported where there's a recall, but you know that product is actually available in other markets, in particular, let's say the ASEAN. If you look at the ASEAN countries, and you might want to, make sure that there is enhanced communication about incidents, because the incident may not have happened in your country, but you might be affected by it. So I think on this vigilance and adverse event reporting, I think it is a bit easier to conceptualize how you can rely on others and recognize decisions others make. But for market surveillance, for the sampling and testing, that's a bit more difficult, because obviously you are trying to be assured and enforce market control in your jurisdiction. So it's a bit difficult to rely on testing reports from other jurisdictions unless it's for substandard product. And I think it could be of interest that if a neighboring country or even another country asks you for your report, your testing report, that those could be shared. It is still always the prerogative of the regulator to make their own decision. They don't have to make the same decision based on that data. I guess, my question about market surveillance, is it risk-based, is really important. I work with a lot of pharmacists. They talk about risk-based market surveillance all the time for medicines. And I say, well, let's just say we've got about 5,000 medicines. We've got 50,000 or plus devices.
Yeah, thank you.
And so the order of magnitude is much greater. Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe I can stop there, even as I was coughing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Anita. So thank you for the speaker, maybe this last time. Thank you for Mr. Mark Svensson, Mrs. Anita Sands from WSO, Pak Heru Surnario, Pak Erwin Hermanto, the audience. Thank you for the participant on this session. Thank you very much for panelists. Yeah, back to the IMC. Thank you very much and good day.
Thank you, Pak Wira, and to the panelists for that session. We've come to the end of today's webinar, and I hope it was a useful one for all. A big thank you to the speakers, particularly those who joined us from the US, Canada, Geneva, and Mexico, despite it being late hours, and to the participants for staying engaged throughout. For those interested, the MDRC project in Indonesia will last through June 2024, and we are conducting a number of other training sessions and consultations related to good regulatory practices in the medical device sector. Some of them will be closed sessions, but we will certainly have sessions that are open for public participation as well. So keep an eye out for those. Finally, once again, a reminder that the video recordings for both webinars from last week and this week and the speaker presentations are available on the Ministry of Health's dedicated website. The recording is also available on the Center for Health Policy and Management's YouTube channel. So be sure to refer to that and share that with your colleagues. Thank you all and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Prof. Laksono.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Wira.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih, Pak Wira.
Thank you. Terima kasih.